Dredge is one of the best indie games I've played recently, and its art style is awesome. On first glance, Dredge may appear like a cute fishing game, but don't be fooled. When night rolls around, everything changes. There's a heavy Lovecraftian influence on the game's design, from the oceanic entities that hunt you, the oppressive fog that rolls in, or the bevy of strange side characters. Through this, Dredge creates an incredible sense of atmosphere. But what exactly makes its art style so captivating? And how does it balance the line between cozy and creepy? In this video, we're going to be taking a deep dive behind the visuals of Dredge and recreating it to better understand how it works. To spice things up, I also wanted to challenge myself and paint an Australian bird in Dredge's art style. I polled you guys on my Instagram and YouTube community tab, with Cassowary being the clear winner, so that's what we're going to do today. In Dredge fashion, there's a normal and aberrated version of each fish, so we're also going to be doing the same with our cassowary. By the way, my name is Daniel, I'm an illustrator, and together with my robot buddy Wyatt, we're going to be analyzing the art of Dredge. Let's get straight into it. When understanding any art style, I find it's important to examine the design philosophies of the people behind it. In Dredge's case, the game was developed by a team of 4 at Black Salt Games, who are based in New Zealand. Alex Ritchie was the art director with help from Michael Bastians, and together they created the look and feel of Dredge. One of the main reasons for Dredge's graphic look was simply due to the limitations the team had. As described in Dredge's art book, the team only had about 2 weeks to develop the first prototype. This led to simpler forms and far less complex rendering, which then formed the basis for Dredge's graphic art style. In this insightful GCAP talk by Michael Bastians, he also mentions that both Dishonored and Disco Elysium were major influences on Dredge, and it's pretty easy to see why.
But the main thing is that Alex, art director, already had a pretty good idea of the sort of direction he kind of wanted to go in. So he's got some really cool influences from games like Disco Elysium and Dishonored, which are some of his favorite games, and then some of that kind of shines through in his art.
Both games feature a traditional kind of feeling, with a lot of color abstraction and interplay between the shapes and edges. Dredge does this too, but it's a lot stricter and tighter in its execution. It's nowhere near as messy. Let's take a further look at how it achieves this, starting with the shape design. Which is absolutely perfect for the hostile world of Dredge. Another reason for having strong shape design is because it complements gameplay. It's basically the same reason as in my Bioshock art analysis as well. As everything is fairly low poly, this saves the team from creating extremely detailed and expensive assets. And now I'm using the term expensive to refer to the game's actual performance and engine, but also probably literally, as it would have taken longer and actually been more expensive crafting an extremely detailed world. But strong shape design also helps us, the player, as most of the fish we interact with are seen in icon form. We then have to place these on our boat to manage our inventory, so these silhouettes are actually the most important thing to nail. And now look, it doesn't just end there, because within these silhouettes are even more shapes. When it comes to the shapes within shapes, let's take a look at some basic design principles for Dredge. As I mentioned, there are a lot of pointy shapes, so expect to see things like triangles and rectangles in the 2D renders. This isn't to suggest that there are no curves in Dredge, because there are some, but they're strong curves. Take a look at this barbed eel. Instead of it being one clean curve here, the shape moves down and is then caught and then flicks the other way. This makes this arch here with some of these points sticking out. We do see some examples of ellipses being used in the rendering style, but very sparingly and where it makes sense, like for example, the eyes of fish. Also, on another example here, we can see that even this pocket watch's face is very clean and there's no jagged edges around the ellipse itself. However, there are jagged edges used on the chain, which themselves feel a lot sharper. Now, this graphic approach of shape design also extends to the colors and rendering style. In these fish icons, for example, notice how each color is a separate shape. The very small specular highlights also gives a sense of wetness on the fish. When actually rendering the fish, I would imagine that there's a lot of slow abstraction that's built up based off of the references that Alex Ritchie and Michael Bastians were using. There's no blending, no airbrushes, and everything is painted with 100% opacity. That's right, Wyatt. And something I noticed was that there's no strong lighting or shadows used on these icons, even on the characters. They're usually quite flat, with most of the work being done by the local colors, which just refers to the colors of the objects and materials without the influence from strong lights. In fact, this was intentional, as the art book also explains that heavy shadows were used in the early 2D designs, but because the in-game art style features much flatter lighting, the heavy shadows stood out as being too different. If we zoom out and convert everything to black and white, we can also see that this contrast stays roughly the same on these icons. The color saturation of the fish is also fairly grounded. While the colors are a little bold, it doesn't stray too far, and because of this, gives Dredge a more realistic feel in its color choices. However, the same can't be said for the aberrated versions, which are a little interesting. Things get a little crazier with the aberrated versions. We see colors pushed to the extreme, black holes and bright lights, and all of that little chromatic aberration, which is the color fringing you see on the edges. I mean, now that it makes sense, chromatic aberration, aberrated versions of the fish, it was right there in the title. Also, don't worry, I got you back. I'm going to be showing you how I create this chromatic aberration effect when I'm painting the cassowary later in the vid. Creatively, there's a lot to explore here, and I think this is actually the most fun aspect of it all. Of course, a lot of these aberrated versions have to be within the theme of Lovecraft. So to me, that means drawing inspiration from things like the galaxy and space, tentacles, eyeballs, basically just trying to make things a little bit more unexplainable. I think the success of a lot of the aberrated designs also comes from the understanding of the original animal. As all the fauna in Dredge is based on reality, the aberrated versions often play on their characteristics. My favorite is the Void Eye, which looks like a giant galaxy and black hole burning through physical space. But the original fish that this is based on is the Barrel Eye, which itself already looks like something out of a cosmic horror already. From a creative standpoint, it's already really cool seeing something that looks alien to begin with in real life and then turning that up to 11. Okay, now, so we've discussed shapes, we've discussed color, and we've discussed design. I'd say we're ready to paint. Oh yeah, at this point you're probably as excited to paint as I am, but Wyatt does have a point. The reason that we're doing all of this prep work now is to ensure that we're going to have the most success when we actually start painting. I can't emphasize this enough. So I'm going to intentionally limit my brushes and tools. I'm not going to use any fancy textured brushes as it's not really part of the style. Instead, most of my shape language and design is going to come from the lasso tool, the hard round brush, and maybe a tiny bit of the airbrush if I'm trying to subtly add a gradient. To also fit within Dredge's style, I'm going to be basing my cassowary on the inventory grid system too. In the game, the grid system is used for inventory management, and you have to organize all your fish or items on the boat like so. By the way, I also thought about an idea of why we're painting a cassowary for this one, so maybe instead of being a fisherman, we're actually a zookeeper, and we have to go around the zoo catching all of these animals before they start turning into really horrifying, disgusting Lovecraftian creatures. Let's begin. So the first thing that I'm doing here is I'm adding in my sketch based off of that grid system that I said earlier. I'm looking at my reference and I'm trying to understand the overall shapes of the cassowary. So it's kind of like they have long necks and a really big body here with a very interesting kind of leg. So it was interesting fitting the cassowary's silhouette within the actual inventory system because, as I mentioned, I'm also thinking about gameplay of how this is going to be used later on. So I'm also thinking about shapes in terms of big, medium, and small. So of course the neck is going to be a small shape, the eyes are going to be an even smaller shape, but the body can get much more simplified, and I'm just sort of drawing a curve over the top there as well. I am also thinking about all of the harsh lines that Dredge has in its art style, so adding in a lot of sharp corners wherever possible and trying to make the cassowary feel a little bit hostile. I mean, cassowaries are kind of crazy to begin with anyway, but I wanted to kind of reflect that with the intentional shapes that I was using. So now I'm removing my line art layer and turning down the opacity and really focusing on enhancing those shapes as much as possible. You can see that for the tail feathers and even for some of the feathers sticking out, I'm really trying to make sure they feel sharp and angled, but I'm also trying to make them not too small as well. Later on, you'll see me try and simplify these shapes a little bit more just because I feel, at least from this side over here, everything is a little bit hard to read at the bottom. Most of Dredge's silhouettes don't really have that much shapes and that much lines going out of it anyway, so we're just trying to simplify that as much as possible. Once the stage is done, I'm now moving into blocking in the local values of the actual cassowary itself. I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, so only having one dark shape for the actual body itself, and the beak and the little crest thing on top. I apologize, I don't know cassowary anatomy that much, but you'll see me working on the foot over there as well and kind of adding those ridges that's present on the actual legs. So I'm choosing now a bit of a lighter tone, and I'm starting to block in some of those extra shapes as well where I want some lighter values. A little bit on the legs and a little bit on the top of the head as well. Now with another darker tone, I'm going to be adding in some little bit of directionality of the shadows. In this part over here, I'm now adding some color to our cassowary, and I'm only doing this in Photoshop by having a blend mode set to color. So blocking in just that classic blue that you have there on the neck, and then a little bit of the lighter blue just above the eye. I've decided to leave the actual body of the cassowary itself a bit more of that neutral tone that you see, and sort of playing up a little tiny hint of purple as well. I also wanted to make sure that the feathers on the actual body were readable, so I've added a little bit more detail and just a tiny bit more highlights there as well. Now that I've got most of my shapes down, I'm also adding in a pretty strong rim light on the actual cassowary itself, just to kind of separate it a little bit more from the background, which will really help to make it pop. I'm also adding in a couple of extra details just on the side over there, and now working on the actual beak itself. So when I'm designing my textures, I am again looking at my references, trying to interpret that, but also paying attention to where certain lines are drawn, and then just sort of recreating that in the actual painting too. Since I've got my colors laid down mostly at this stage as well, and I'm pretty happy with the base, I'll then go ahead and color pick the actual blocks of color themselves and sort of adjust it a little bit. For example, on the top of the crest there, if I wanted a little bit of a lighter color, I just color pick that, make it a little bit lighter, lay it down, and I'm doing the same kind of around the entire cassowary, trying to get the rendering up as well. Oh, and of course, the creme de la creme, the little highlight on the top of the eye as well. That's very, very important to have, so adding that was very satisfying. Now you're going to see me move on to the creepy, aberrated version of the cassowary. I was trying to think of the direction that I could go in for the cassowary over here, and I thought, of course, dinosaur, right? So I mean, the actual claw on the bottom looks like a raptor claw to begin with, and I'm sure they're super, super sharp and capable of shredding people up. So I wanted to play that, and you'll see me kind of repeat that design, that kind of shape language throughout the rest of the cassowary. So I was sort of thinking of different names of what I could call this creepy cassowary, and the one that stood out to me was like the hooked beak cassowary. At the moment now, in the process, it kind of looks like an angry turkey, and I think because of the way that the beak is situated and the rest of it, it didn't really feel right. So you're going to see me experiment a little bit, and eventually I make the beak the same hooked shape as the actual toe itself. Okay, so you can definitely see here too, I tried to make the beak much more of that hook shape, just to have at least a repeating shape design motif throughout the piece. But even on the bottom, on the tail feathers, I was trying to do like weird fingers or something sort of coming out the cassowary, and make it feel a little bit more organic and a little bit creepier as well. So something important when I was designing the aberrated version of the cassowary too was, you can see me, I've taken my original cassowary and popped it up in the top right hand of the screen here. I want to refer to what I've already done, and that will help to influence the decisions for actually designing the creepier aberrated version. So now when I turn off my line art layer, you can see that everything is already starting to feel not quite right. You know, like a lot of it feels a little bit more mangled, a little bit more mottled, and I was trying to get that across in the actual hooked design of it too. Once again, turning on the grid system just to make sure that everything fits. And from this stage, it's pretty much the same process as the actual cassowary itself. So I'm going to skip forward just a little bit here. So skipping forward a little bit in time, you can see that the cassowaries, some of them that I've noticed too, have this kind of like red thing coming down their necks. But I wanted to have that be in the actual design itself. And so it kind of feels a little bit more sickly, a little bit more kind of twisted. I decided to make the actual eyeball of the cassowary itself just completely devoid of life. Some of the fish icons that I saw in Dredge have the same thing, so I thought it would be kind of fitting having it through as well. Making the crest a little bit more broken and adding a couple more eyeballs just around the cassowary felt like a kind of twisted idea that I wanted to have too. But one thing I do want to emphasize is that when you do have good shapes and good design decisions going on in your actual icons themselves, don't be afraid to repeat them and use them as many times as you need to kind of make sure the entire thing feels coherent. So now I'm trying to also make the eyes feel a little bit more sickly by making them pink and not quite right, like they're kind of bloodshot and they don't really feel that good to begin with. So now that I've got the entire cassowary over here, this is what I came up with. The hooked beak cassowary. Now, of course, it wouldn't be an aberrated version without the actual chromatic aberration itself, so here's what I did. So I have the entire cassowary merged on one layer, which is a separate layer, I'm double clicking on the layer and it's going to bring up this icon. And now I'm going to uncheck the green and blue channels here, and using my transform tool by pressing Ctrl T, I'm going to edge just a little couple pixels over the side, the image itself, and you're going to see the chromatic aberration effect start to take place. So it gives us this really weird 3D effect here, and you can see that kind of color fringing bleeding on the edges, which I think is super cool. And it's definitely the thing that ties everything together as well. Using a couple of masks as well, I'm just going to kind of airbrush out where I don't want this effect, and you can kind of really control where you want the chromatic aberration to. So anyway, that's going to be it for my disgusting cassowary. And that brings us to the final design. So we have our normal cassowary, and then we have our aberrated cassowary as well. Well, this was a pretty in-depth video, but I really hope you guys learned something. I absolutely love making these videos, and I think it's so important to deconstruct and examine great art. There's a lot of awesome indie games out there pushing things, so I think it's really fun kind of celebrating them and shining light on all the work that was done during these games. If you've played Dredge, what did you think of the game? Did you play any of the DLCs, or do you also think that we're going to get a sequel at some point too? And maybe my Zookeeper idea too, that would be pretty sick. If you do want me to make any more Dredge videos in the future, or if you have any questions, just leave them down below. That's going to be it for this video, everybody, and until next time, take care and stay safe.